сейчас едем в заповедник, который занимается спасением волков. В нем находятся волки, которые попавшие в капканы, со всякими разными проблемами, которые болели. Одинокие волки. Все они там, доктора им помогают, за ними смотрят и потом выпускают на вольную волю. Так что сейчас приедем глянем, что за волки. Место называется Northern Lights. Северное сияние, дикое северное сияние, центр волков. Вот сюда.
Introduce you to our pack here. The wolves here at the Wool Center have all been born and raised in captivity. No one has been taken from the wild and no one would return to the wild. So captivity means they've been raised with people, okay? So with saying that, these large fences are here for the wolves' protection, not yours whatsoever. They have large enclosures. They get to choose pretty much all the spaces they get to go into when they're not arguing. And one thing we do differently here than any other center is that we actually exercise our wolves. So they go on off-leash hikes. They get a lot of exercise and freedom, so they're not always confined to the enclosures here at the Wool Center. So, very governed through the provincial government. So we spade and neuter these animals as well, and they are not born here. They're born in other facilities. So let's introduce you to the pack. Now the big blonde guy who's laying on the fence line here is Dave, and he's been known as Scrappy Dave, but now we're calling him Sad Sack Dave. His feelings got hurt a couple of weeks ago as his sister and his other roommate started to pick on him, and now he's been put by himself. He's got a couple of war wounds on him from fighting with the others, but he is healthy and happy still. And we're working on getting him and his sister back together. So a couple times every day, I'm socializing them, trying to get them to integrate together. He is 8 years old, and unlike his sister, he's very much a chicken. He's afraid of a lot of things, and very aloof like his wild cousins would be. Flora, who's on the other side over on this fence, is full sister to Dave, 100% gray wolf as well. And she, unlike Dave, is not afraid of anything. She actually goes on the off-leash hikes regularly. She actually does a lot of school programs and work outside of the facility on a regular basis. So she's more of a take charge kind of girl, where Dave is more of the chicken, and they're from the same litter. So once we get finished the program, you guys can all go up onto the deck and have a look. In the front enclosure off the deck is Murphy and Farley. It's new. We've got them all turned around here, so I have to think of this at the moment. Uno and Mac are on the back side at the moment. We're integrating Murphy back in with the back boys, so it's a slow process back there. He's not quite getting along with Mac as we speak, so it's one of those processes. So just like us, as you our teenagers turn of age, they start to change and become more challenging. This is the state we're in with our 3-year-olds as well. So they become teenagers. Now they're challenging the adults. They want to be in a different position. So now our jobs are changing here at the Wool Center as well. This would happen in the wild, and if this happened in the wild, we would call these animals dispersals if they weren't getting along with the rest of the pack. So they would leave those packs, go start their own, or go start their own pack. Or maybe live as a peripheral wolf, which we call a lone wolf, which only has a 1% survival rate in the wild. So with saying that, they might not all survive by themselves. And this is when packs change, numbers change, you get diversity amongst the gene pool and all of those things when young wolves start changing and moving out and doing what they do. So it's the same as in our society as well. So Uno, Murphy, and Farley are all 3 years old. They just turned 3. So it's like the clock switched.
Still puppies.
And yes, so now we're teenagers. We're not puppies anymore. That you can't say that word. We're now teenagers. So now we're trouble. So they're challenging, and it's going to be a couple trying few months. I've never had 3 at this age at one time before, so this is challenging for myself as well. So it's a whole different situation. So I'm not really sure what to expect. I've dealt with 1 and 2, but I've never dealt with 3 boys, strong boys at the same time.
Did they ever bite you?
Yeah, but I go in there geared. I pack a bear banger. I've got choke chains. I've got leashes. Prepared. You know, and if they do bite me, it's out of trying to grab the other animal, not aggressively biting me. So I've never been aggressively bitten.
But is it possible, like, to get the wolves so they can like home animals?
In your home, no. So 100%
I mean,
wolf.
so they're still gonna be wild, right? So they still can attack you anytime.
Wolves don't attack people. Animals only attack a person if they're
when
out
they're
of fear.
scared.
So a dog is known to attack. So when you create the fear factor to the non-fear factor, that's when they become dangerous. But in general, the wolf would be fearful, probably, typically in the corner, being afraid of you, and would probably lash out out of fear, not aggression. So those are 2 different words altogether. So in the wolf's world, it's not being aggressive. And that's what we're trying to dispel here, is that they are not an aggressive animal.
So when you meet in the wild, what do you do with a wolf?
If you met a wolf in the wild, it would probably look at you for 2 seconds and run and turn the other way. It would never attack you. There's never been a proven vicious attack in over 100 years from a wolf onto a human. They are very shy and aloof animals. So they are not going to harm us. Yes, they're a predator. Yes, they eat other animals for survival, but they eat the weak for the survival. They're not after humans or anything. There's not those conflicts. So any of those movies or any of those things that you've seen are not true whatsoever. That is, you know, Hollywood trying to expose this to make man look better in general.
You mentioned you let them go off leash.
Yes.
How they acting? Can you control them? Can you give them commands like a dog?
They probably listen better than most people's dogs listen. So they come back on a recall. I have a couple that are a little lazy, but when they get lazy, we put them back on a 20-foot lead and we teach them to have a recall again. I am known as the alpha, so I provide that habitat, food, water, shelter, and space. So they have no reason to go anywhere else, and that's why they stay close to us. So we provide all that great stuff for them, and then they stay close. So that's what the alphas would provide in the wild as well, is the food and shelter. And so everyone looks up to them for that reason.
What do you think about to compare, I would say, like German Shepherd and the wolf? Who's going to be smarter? I mean, IQ.
Wolf.
Like wolf, right?
We took the wolf and bred all species of dogs out of the wolf initially, is what they figure. So even a Shih Tzu and a Chihuahua typically has come from the wolf. So the baseline of the DNA is wolf, is Canis lupus. So that's how we got dogs, apparently.
Because I still know the guys up on Siberia, up north there. They cross in the wolves, like the wild wolves, with the dogs, and they take them home. They live in a family, like with people. But after a couple years, they still looked in the wild forest.
Oh, of course they
Yeah,
would.
if
If I wasn't providing food, my wolves would go away.
So when you call them, are they gonna come? If you call them a name?
If I call their names,
do they
yeah,
listen
they
like a dog?
listen. Yep.
That's cool. It's very cool.
All right.
You know, people usually problem when they go with the dogs and you go with the wolf stuff.
Well, I go in times where I'm not going to run into people, and I typically am very respectful for that. And for me to be able to take these animals out the way I do, I have to have them trained. Else I'm setting myself
There is
up
no
for
other
failure.
way, yeah.
So that's not really something I want to be doing. And you learn fast to not do that when you're handling animals like this. All right. So Mac is the big blonde guy that's on the back side. He's a 9-year-old male. He's the oldest wolf that we have on property. He's got a little bit of wounds on him. You're not really going to see him today because he's put on the back side because Farley decided he didn't like him this morning as well. So we're trying to juggle and get things sorted out. So you will only get to see the 2 front ones, and that's Farley and Murphy that are on the very front. All right, so that's our pack here at the Wolf Center. Now, wolves in the wild. We live in families, and an average wolf pack in the Rocky Mountains is between about 4 and 8 animals. In the north, we see packs much larger than that, 10, 12, depending on the availability of food for them. So we'll determine the pack size. So in the Rockies, our packs are smaller because of loss of habitat. They don't have as many places to build their homes because people are absolutely everywhere, and I'm one of those people, so I can't blame anybody else. So we all live in the areas where wolves would naturally live. And even with our federal parks and our provincial parks, they are very habituated by having humans absolutely everywhere hiking and stuff, so it's much harder for animals to pick up real estate. Yes, sir?
What do you give them to eat?
I will get there. That's a very good question, but let me get through pack and then we can talk food, okay? Perfect. Awesome. So, do you know who the leader of the pack is? Do you know what we call them? I just called myself that.
Alpha?
Alpha, exactly. So, the alphas are the leader of the pack, and it's a male and female team typically. There's always one out of the 2 that might be a little stronger than the other, and like the real world, it is a female in the wolf's world as well. And so they are the ones that make most of the decisions, take most of the care of the babes, and looks after the family. So 60% of the time in the wild, we're seeing the females being the leaders more so than the males. A lot of people assume that in the wild, it's the biggest wolf of the pack that's the alpha. That is not the case whatsoever. It's usually the oldest and the smartest of the pack. The size of the animal means nothing at all. So typically, and it's not the animal that's walking out front either. It's usually the animal in the middle or in the back. So you cannot determine who the pack leader is amongst a pack if you're just to look at a pack of wolves. So with saying that, does anybody know who the next level of wolf might be within the pack structure? What we call them? Any idea? No,
the
not the
food
spouse.
collectors?
It's called the beta. And then you've got the subordinates who are all the working wolves of the pack. And then you have the omega, who's on the bottom of the social structure. So the omega is the one that stays back and babysits and takes care of everybody while everybody else goes out and hunts. And that's the wolf that actually absorbs the animosity amongst the pack too. So when everybody goes out and hunts and brings food back, they actually will get fed, and they get fed through certain methods. So does anybody know how we would feed a wolf puppy or any other animals would get fed in the wild by adults? Birds do this. What's that?
Baby bird it.
They baby bird it. Yes, they regurgitate it. So they throw it up chucking, barfing. That's how wolf puppies are fed, and other members of the pack as well. So they will regurgitate that for other members. So everyone gets fed and looked after. So one important fact amongst wolves is that they state that wolves are more similar to humans in their social behavior than any other mammal or primate out there. So, and I truly believe this after living with them for 20 years. Breaking up their fights and watching how they're loyal and social and how they do miss each other and all of those things is very similar to the way that my family is as well. So I don't get along with my brother most days, and someone would have to keep a gate between us too right now if that was the case as well. So it's the same thing that goes on here.
How do you break their fights?
How do I break up their
No,
fights?
why?
Because I'm in the public eye, and if I allow an animal to die, then I'm at fault.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I have to do everything in my power because I'm regulated through the provincial government. And if something did die on my watch and allowed it to happen without trying to stop it, I would be at fault. So can you imagine PETA and everybody on my doorstep if I was to allow that to happen? Wouldn't be much fun.
Oh, it just kind of looks very naturally, you know. If
It
you
is,
kinda
but
keep
not,
your
you
fat-
might assume that, but somebody
do.
else doesn't see it that way. So I have to keep the world happy because I'm in the public eye, unfortunately. When you open your doors to the public, you get every opinion possible through that gate, and you have to keep everybody happy at the same time. All right, so puppies get of age, they start working up that social ladder, and like I said earlier, they'll either stay amongst that family or they'll branch off and go and start their own family, go join a family, or possibly be that person or that wolf that has that personality that doesn't get along with anybody. And if that's the case, they don't live very long. And if that's the case, a lot of times they starve to death because they cannot survive by themselves very well. 1% survival rate in the wild being a lone wolf. All right, so what do wolves eat? Good question. What do you think wolves eat in the wild?
Squirrels,
No,
the goat,
they will eat a goat. Yeah, they can catch it.
bighorn,
What do you
sheep,
think?
bighorn sheep, elks, mooses.
Elk? They eat elk?
Yeah,
Easy
so big
one,
animals, deer, moose, elk,
Deer, yeah, I guess
caribou,
deer, yeah.
bison, bighorn sheep, or what wolves' food is primarily.
So they actually kill that animal, or they just find it somewhere?
They got just a piece of
they
it.
would prefer to find it and not have to work for it, but if they have to work for it, they will definitely kill it. So they're known as pulling hamstrings, jugular veins, to take the animal down to be able to get it. But
They're
when they
perfect
prey on
hunters.
those animals, they prey on the weak, the sick, the old, and the less unfortunate. They're not going to be able to take down a 1,400-pound moose or bison that have huge antlers, that is healthy, that's going to be able to ward them off. So it's a really hard job to be able to catch their food source to provide for their family. It's not an easy job whatsoever. Even when that animal is weak, it is very difficult for them to catch them as well. That's also why they go over after young and things like that as well. Lots of times they'll run their prey right into water, so it's easier to catch them. So they're no different than the way that human would go and slaughter their animals as well to be able to get their food source, if we want to put it in that perspective. So they catch their prey, they literally wolf their food down because they don't know when their next meal is going to arise. And does anybody here have an idea of how often a wolf might eat daily?
It could be once a month.
Exactly. If they're lucky, it's once a week. But it's usually only 3 or 4 times in a month that they get fed. So depending on where they're living, that habitat that they're living in, as well as how well they are at doing their job at hunting as well. So
Quick question: how often do you feed them?
I'm going to get right there. That was next on the list. So a wolf can consume 25% of its own body weight at one time. That's also why it's not eating daily. So, and like I said, they'd rather be a scavenger before they would be a hunter. Now here at the Wolf Center, we will feed anything from freezer burnt meat to food brought in from local farmers, ranchers, old or injured animals. We will also feed, a lot of our food is purchased. So we purchase a lot of the food from a wholesaler. So we will pick up roadkill off the side of the road, but in the province of British Columbia, the roadkill is not free to us. We do have to pay for that. So we pay $69 plus GST to pick up a dead animal off the side of the road to feed the animals here at the Wolf Center. And yes, this is ridiculous. And yes, we do. It's a process that we have to go through. But they want us to justify the fact that the animal is not being poached, and we have to pay for a transportation permit is why we have to do this. So we will bring in an animal, say it's a 100-pound deer on the side of the road. We'll pick it up. We'll call the government. We'll get the permit for it. We'll feed the animal in the meantime, give them the Visa card number and let them process it. And we'll divide that animal up into like 6 chunks. So usually, you know, the body catheter goes into one pen, and we got 4 legs to divide up to go into a couple other pens. And a 100-pound animal no longer lasts in more than 48 animals, and there's really no sign that that animal was even in there by the time that they're cleaned up. So the bones are pretty much gone, the hide's gone. They pretty much eat absolutely everything that they have been provided. Now, in the wild, they wouldn't eat as much bone and stuff. They do here because they're a little bit more bored. But also in the wild, wolves, once they've preyed on an animal, it helps feed up to 20 some odd other species naturally in the wild by leaving fur and bones and the gut pile and all of those things behind as well. And everything a wolf eats helps them digest something that they have ate previously. So wolves are not true carnivores either. They are omnivores. So grasses and berries are very important to their digestive tract. In fact, it's 7% of their own diet is part of their digestive system by eating vegetation, so it's very important for them. So these guys every day, a couple kilos every day in the winter time, and a little less in the summertime because they don't need as much. They don't have to run that metabolism to keep their bodies quite as warm. So it just varies on how much food we have to feed them and how often we get like a roadkill or whatever. So they had some moose meat yesterday. They got the end of some donated moose meat. And so they will get a beef snack probably tomorrow morning is how it'll work. So they got a good feeding last night, so we'll give them some beef tomorrow morning.
You think they would die if you let them go in wild?
You think they'll die?
No,
No.
just
Well,
what do you think?
they
Would
probably
die?
would because they walk up to somebody's pickup truck and say, "Hey, where's the beef?" and they would probably get shot. So yeah, they would die that way. I know my animals could survive. I know that they could take an animal down. But the problem would be is they'd walk up to somebody, someone would be afraid of it and shoot them. That's the fear. All right, so some fun facts about wolves. Wolves can smell over 2.5 kilometers away. They can hear over 8. They can see 100 times greater than us at night, and extremely they can see very similar to us during the days. They can also see more prominent reds and yellows. Wolves also have 2 fur coats. They have a nice inner down that keeps us extremely warm with long outer guard hairs, which acts like a raincoat. So those guard hairs are hollow, so they don't hold any condensation whatsoever. So it wicks the moisture away. Wolves also have 2 large webbed feet. These webbed feet act like snowshoes for them, so they stay on the surface of the snow and other textures of ground. And wolves' feet actually have the main thermostats of their bodies, as well as the scent glands are in the pads of their feet as well. So if anybody here has ever seen a wolf or a dog stand there and scratch the ground after they have had a pee, it's because they're releasing scent from the pads of their feet. They're personalizing that space. So your dogs do the same thing. Wolves also, when they're running, they're cross-tracked. The back foot meets the opposite front foot, so they can move very quickly and aloofly. They walk between 4 and 8 kilometers an hour, trot between 12 and 18, and can run over 65 kilometers an hour and hold that speed for 20K, so very far and fast. Their territories are as small as 100 square kilometers and can be as large as over 2,500 square kilometers. So they can travel in a very far space in a very short period of time, believe it or not. Wolves also are good swimmers. They've been known to travel 20 kilometers from island to island to get to their food sources as well. In Vancouver areas, they've been able to track them, so they can swim very well as well. And not all of them will like to swim. I think it's all based on personalities as well. So wolves communicate. How do we think wolves communicate? One's communicating that way right now, this little wolf. So they use their voices. They howl, they whine, they guff, they growl, but they don't bark like our dogs do, thank goodness. They also don't just howl at the full moon. They howl for many, many reasons. They will howl to let us know where they're at, what they're up to. Maybe or not they're happy or sad. Maybe they just want to sing a song. Maybe they're warning the neighboring pack away. We're really not too sure what they're saying when they're saying it. But we apparently know that the howl can travel over 8 kilometers away. So it's pretty amazing. So they can communicate that far away with their sounds. So a small group of 4 or 5 wolves will sound like a group of 10 or 15 as well. So they never hit the same tones and pitches at the same times either. So it sounds like a large pack, not a small pack. So wolves also communicate with their body language. So ear positions, tail positions, just like your dogs do. They do a lot of the same communication with their body language. Facial expressions, all sorts of things. They also communicate with their scent. So like I said, with your scent glands in the pads of their feet, 3/4 of the way down Dave's tail there's a big black patch, and that is a scent gland in his tail. And also your dogs have those as well. And then also they communicate with urine and scat, and that scat is just the polite word for wild animals' poo. So they will mark those territories out that way as well. All right, guys, so once now that we've learned all these fun things about wolves in general, let's talk about the conservation of this species and the importance it has for us in the forest. Now, wolves are known as a keystone species, and this is how I like to explain their importance, is to explain to you what a keystone species is. So if you think of an archway like this, and you were to take out the center stone of that archway, what would happen? What would happen to it? Do you know what would happen to it if you took the center stone out of that arch?
Following you?
It would fall down, that's right. So it would collapse, and that's exactly what would happen to a forest if you take top predators like wolves out. So to explain this the best is to tell you a story about our neighboring country, United States of America. They are home to the largest national park in North America and the oldest national park in North America. And this is Yellowstone National Park. So straight south of here, and found in Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho, this park was created in the late 1800s to become an elk preserve. So back then, they felt that it was far more important to have prey animals than predators. So what the government officials did at that time is they went out and they extirpated predators from their national park, specifically concentrating on the wolf population. So by 1920, they shot the last wolf from their national park. So they shot some bears and some cougars, but the wolves is what they were really focusing on. So by 1920, they shot that last wolf, and they were super happy. So after a short period of time after shooting that wolf, they started to see a change in their park. They started to notice that the elk populations and the deer populations were exploding, and they were super happy about that. But in the meantime, they started to notice other things changing. They started to notice that willow trees and aspen trees were no longer growing to be big stands anymore. They started to notice that the banks of the rivers and the streams were eroding and changing directions and drying up. They also noticed that animal species were no longer living in the parks anymore. So there was no bears left. There was no birds in the sky. There was no beaver in the rivers and streams. And there was lots of other insects and other things, fish, no fish in the ponds and rivers either. So almost every species of the park was disappearing except the deer and elk and the coyotes. Everything else was pretty much falling off in populations. So they allowed this to happen for a few years, and then all of a sudden in 1950 they decided that they better maybe do something about this. So what they did is they actually decided to do a study. Now a new warden came to town, and his name is Jonas, and he did his master thesis based on why is there no willow trees and why is there no beaver in Yellowstone National Park. Well, he found out that after doing that study, that the reason why there was no willows or beavers was the fact that there was no wolves in that environment. So without wolves in the park system, there was no animal to push the prey animals around. So they sat still and overate all those willow trees and all of those grasslands, and that caused the rivers and streams to erode and change directions. And that made it so that the beaver couldn't have any tools to do his job as an engineer for the water system. So the aquatic system started to fail as well because the beaver was no longer there. The beaver need those small willow trees to build the dams, as well as the pectin in that to be able to survive from. So without those willow trees, he had no place or no food source either. Where were the birds going to build their nests, and where were the insects going to live if there was no water? So everything from the very top of the food chain right down to the very bottom of the food chain was affected by the fact that there was no wolves there to push the prey animals around. So those elk and deer started to act like domesticated livestock. So they sat around and overgrazed the food for everybody else in that environment. So they knew the answer to this in 1950, but do you think the U.S. government acted on it very quickly? No, because we know how governments work. It took over 40 years before they decided to do something. So in 1995, they called up Canada and they asked us if we had enough wolves to share with them. And we decided that we did. So we took over 35 wolves from northern BC and Alberta, gave them first-class helicopter tickets with their green cards, placed them down into Yellowstone, into 4 different corners of the national park, 4 different packs, and let the Canadian wolves go to work. And believe it or not, in one short year of the Canadian wolves being in that national park system, they started to see willow trees and aspens starting to grow again. And in 8 short years, the whole entire cycle of that ecology came back to balance thanks to those Canadian wolves. They have plenty of songbirds. They have plenty of beaver. They have stands of willows and aspens that they haven't seen in 100 years. Everything is in harmony as we speak today. The wolf population is doing extremely well in Yellowstone National Park as we speak. There's been dispersals outside of the parks. There is regulations on wolves outside of the parks. They do have hunting regulations. They only have one season in a year to be able to hunt a wolf. And the population fluctuates from anywhere from about 250 down to about 75 regularly. They're sitting at 120 right now within the parks, and they're quite happy with those populations. So let's talk Canada. Well, we helped set a precedent in the United States of America, but while we were doing that, we were actually doing the exact same study here in Canada in 1999. Why is there no willow trees and why is there no beaver in Banff National Park? The exact same conclusion, no wolves. Without wolves living in our national forest, the reason for it is because of loss of habitat. There's too many people visiting our national forest systems in our Rocky Mountains. In 5 national parks in the Rocky Mountains, we have less than 75 wolves in 5 national parks. And that is because when they created our parks in the late 1800s, early 1900s, they created our parks around views and recreation, not around preserving it for wildlife's future whatsoever. So our government likes to make money off of our parks. So we have town sites, we have ski hills, we have nightlife, we have hiking, we have whatever you like in our national parks. We're actually the only country in the world that exposes their parks the way that they do. So our wildlife cannot coexist. We have highways, railroads, smack dab down the middle. So these animals have a hard time picking up a home area within the national park boundaries. So with saying that, within the parks they can't survive, and outside of the parks they can't survive either. So wolves have a really hard time for this reason. So we've proven this in Canada, and we've proven it in the United States of America. To have healthy systems, you need to have wolves. So unfortunately, our governments outside of those federal park boundaries hunt, bait, and trap wolves 12 months of the year. Canada is home to less than 40,000 wolves across Canada. The world is home to less than 400,000 wolves. We can't afford to be losing any more. I believe that the only reason why we still hunt, bait, and trap, poison, and basically ostracize these animals is the fact that we fear them. We fear the job that they do for us, and we fear the fact that they're very similar to us. Our governments right now in Alberta for the last 15 years have been shooting wolves from helicopters in the name of caribou. Caribou are on the endangered species list now because of loss of habitat. And they've declined in 80% in 20 years due to the fact that they have no habitat left to live in. So no food, no water, no shelter, and space. And this is all due to industry-based businesses. So we log Canada. This is how we make our money. It's not off of gas and oil. We make our money off of our trees. So we ship our trees off, and we ship all our animals' homes off. We need these trees to breathe. Not only is this happening in Alberta, it's happening in British Columbia as well. We want to increase our parks by 30% in British Columbia, but we have to stop logging and mining and industry before we can increase anything. It's not going to happen. But we need the world to be aware, if we want to have healthy environments to live in and have healthy trees and forests to enjoy, we need to have top predators like wolves to have that. So we have to stop the crucifixion on these animals and start being aware of the importance that they have for us. Like I said in the beginning, there has never been a proven vicious attack of a healthy wolf. Why are we treating them so poorly? We need to have these animals to have healthy herd populations and to have anything else going on. We need trees to breathe, and we need trees to have water. Without those things, we need to have wolves. So I know this is a lot of information in a short period of time. It is slightly political sometimes, but we need people to be aware of this information so that we can make the proper choices when it does come down to voting. And we need to start voting for the environment because that's really the only thing that's going to save us. So is there any questions or concerns? So I ask if you're interested. We do have a petition outside the door that's been started by the Valhalla Pure. If you're interested in seeing an increase in provincial parks in British Columbia, please sign that petition to
We're
help
down.
us.
Petition for what?
We're trying to increase the sizes of our provincial parks in BC by 30%.
Oh.
So that we can have a little bit more preserved land, because right now the laws on our provincial parks, you can actually hunt in our provincial parks in British Columbia. So we're trying to get some stops and some changes on it so that it's actually preserving something instead of just a big campground. Well, guys, have a look at the wolves up top. Myself, Monica, and Michelle are here too. They're training to get ready for the summer season. Hopefully it'll hit us soon. I appreciate you coming out and supporting us today and all the world's craziness. And be safe, and we'll be around to answer any more of your questions.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.